Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Speaker, I'd like to file the annual report of the Alberta Council on Admissions and Transfers.
Associate Minister of Agriculture.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the annual report of the ADC Corporation and the Canadian Alberta Crop Insurance Corporation.
Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the annual report of the Alberta Art Foundation, year ending March 31, 87.
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the annual report of the Alberta Liquor Control Board.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 25 students of Rosslyn Junior High School in the riding of Glengarry. They're accompanied today by their teachers Gordon Bashewski and Jean Gillen. I would ask them to rise in the members' gallery and receive the very warm welcome of the Assembly.
Edmonton Calder, followed by Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce, through you and to members of the Assembly, on behalf of my colleague from Edmonton Belmont, 27 grade 6 students from East Edmonton Christian School in the Belmont constituency, or Beverly, sorry, excuse me.
All right.
They are accompanied by their teachers E. Vandergrift and G. Monsma and parents J. Tabak and G. Ort, and I would ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly today on behalf of my colleague for St. Albert, 23 grade 6 students from the Neil M. Ross School in St. Albert. They're accompanied by their teacher Imelda Borodauka and a couple of parents, Pauline Komandur and Chris Hutema. They're seated in the public gallery, Mr. Speaker, and I'd ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of members of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, each day we keep hoping that the Premier will give us some honest facts about the Mulroney trade deal. Mr. Speaker, on November the 10th, the government released a propaganda sheet to the news media. It's called the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement Questions and Answers. Mr. Speaker, this is the one that promises 40,000 new jobs for Albertans and an $800 pay raise for everybody in Alberta. We'll all be rich beyond our wildest dreams, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the interesting part of this document is that all the figures come from one single source, the Economic Council of Canada study of September 87. I would remind you, Mr. Speaker, that this was done before the Mulroney trade deal. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier, why did he choose the Economic Council report to justify this government's position?
Mr. Speaker, the document was prepared by my colleague, Minister of Federal Intergovernmental Affairs, with consultation with other ministers. I'd ask the Minister to deal with it.
Mr. Speaker, the particular study in question was one of any number of which painted the accurate and, we thought, useful picture of what would occur. We recognize, of course, that it was done before the deal itself was signed and was done on the assumption that certain industries might have been included in the trade deal, which were subsequently excluded, and therefore it was even more conservative in its approach than it might have been had, for example, the brewing industry or the egg and poultry business or those agricultural marketing boards which might have been part of the deal were in fact excluded, and therefore we felt that its credibility was even more enhanced, and therefore we used the figures associated with that study. There will, of course, be an update by the Economic Council of Canada based upon the actual agreement itself, and we're looking forward to that. We think the figures that they will then come forward will be even more optimistic for Canadians. And I know that won't please the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, but that's life.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that this minister has said that we will be even more impressed by it, because I want to come back to this particular study. We talked yesterday, Mr. Speaker, about the service sector, and the Premier seemed to be concerned about the job losses there. My question to the Premier, as the leader of this government, is the Premier aware that this Economic Council report that they so fondly paraded in front of Albertans, which his government has used to justify this deal, assumes that the service sector will be excluded from this agreement and that all tariff and non-tariff barriers, such as the FERC decision for natural gas, would be eliminated? And of course, this didn't happen under the Mulroney trade deal. Is the Premier aware of this?
Mr. Speaker, the issue of exclusion of services or inclusion of services and investment and those other aspects of the trade deal which was finally arrived at, of course, were not conclusively dealt with, because there were, of course, assumptions which had to be made. But the fact of the matter is that it is the view of the government, having analyzed the situation after the trade deal was arrived at, that the Economic Council of Canada report still forms the best analysis to date. And there are a number of others which could have been used. The Canada West Foundation studies, which are voluminous and all of which indicate that as far as the trade deal potential for Western Canada is concerned, are even more optimistic than the Economic Council of Canada report. We could have used those figures as well.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's very important in this document, Mr. Speaker, that you level with the people of Alberta, because it was assumed that the service area would be exempted. You didn't say anything about that in the report. Right. And fully 83 to 90% of the new jobs that they talk about being created are in that sector, Mr. Speaker. Was this minister then aware, Mr. Speaker, aware of this fallacy before he put this out, or did they deliberately mislead the people of Alberta to put the best possible light on it?
The document, of course, as I indicated, will be updated now that the actual deal has been concluded and when it is signed. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition will have the benefit of that study, the Canada West Foundation studies, and many other studies on the potential impact that there will be for the benefit of Albertans and Canadians. And we will, of course, be putting those figures forward. We are, of course, like anyone else, unable to predict the future with absolute accuracy, but based upon
best-known economic standards in a free market society with which the honourable member is unacquainted, believe that we have given the facts to Albertans in an appropriate way.
Mr. Speaker, what has happened is this government has lied to the people of Alberta. Mr. Speaker, my question is simply to this minister. Why did this government deliberately mislead the people of Alberta by giving out this irresponsible information with a faulty study, and they knew full well it was a faulty study, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, I won't respond to the obvious effort on the part of the Leader of the Opposition to become agitated by his agitation. And in fact, the document put forward by our government for the benefit of the people of Alberta reflects the facts as we know them to be. We do not mislead. It is really unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that this opposition in this legislature has so little faith in the market economy in which the North American economy must work, that they have to try and shout me down while I try and give an answer. The Leader of the Opposition, in his agitation, should actually try and find something positive, because what is positive about this deal is that it will mean thousands and thousands of new and higher paying jobs for Albertans, and unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the opposition doesn't like that, and that's too bad.
The Chair requests the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to withdraw his statement with respect to lie and deliberately lie. It's nevertheless referred there within the matter of unparliamentary language.
Speaker, I refuse to take that back because I was talking about a study. I was not talking about the minister lying in this assembly, and there is a difference, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
The Chair requests the Leader of the Opposition please to review 320 in Beauchesne, and perhaps at the end of the question period do what would be the appropriate thing. The Chair recognizes Westlock Sturgeon on a supplementary.
Supplement to the Honourable Minister, after assuring him that the opposition has all kinds of faith in the people of Alberta. It's the government that they're losing faith in. With respect to small business, which we all want to see developed in this province, in which the government has paid a great deal of service for, could the minister tell us whether or not the continued guaranteeing of loans or grants to help small business start up in the service sector will be legal under the new trade agreement?
Mr. Speaker, the question of the government's ability to work with small business in ensuring their economic future is not impaired by this free trade deal with the United States of America. In fact, it should be noted that the Canadian Federation of Small Businesses, which represents thousands of businesses in Canada and hundreds of businesses in Canada, has come forward and told me personally that they fully support this initiative, and we appreciate their support. And that's the type of thing, those are the type of people who have faith in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, not the Liberal Party or the NDP.
Supplementary, Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Attorney General. In light of many positive studies that have come forth, does the Attorney General have any studies which show the negative impact that would happen if we became victims, if we did not get this free trade agreement and became victims of the rising protectionist feeling in the United States, figures that might help the short-sighted paranoia of some of the members opposite?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there are a number of studies, and I should perhaps refer honourable members back to the most extensive review of the Canadian economy in decades. That was the MacDonald Royal Commission. And that study, which should appeal to some members of the Assembly because of the fact that the author, the chairman, was, of course, a former federal Liberal cabinet minister who happened to see have some foresight and judgment, as perhaps the most extensive study, and it was clearly, Mr. Speaker, aware of the inherent dangers to Canada as a result of the enormous protectionism which is rising in the United States of America relative to not particularly Canada in fact, Mr. Speaker, but to the rest of the world in regard to the world trading environment. And that was a very important study, and on that, in that, of course, there are many examples of what might happen to Canadian industry if protectionist measures were contemplated. And that was even completed even before the Omnibus Trade Bill, sometimes called the Ominous Trade Bill, in the United States Senate and House of Representatives, was before the United States Congress. And that, of course, Mr. Speaker, is something that all members who think we can maintain the status quo in our relationship with the United States should read. Because if that bill comes into effect without giving Canada a special relationship that the Free Trade Agreement will devastate many segments of Alberta and Canadian industry, not the least of which will be the red meat sector and the petrochemical industry, and I could go on.
Further supplementaries? Chair recognizes the Leader of the Opposition on second main question.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate the second question to the member from Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend's Lions Club telethon on violence in the family will increase public awareness of the problem and will thereby create greater demand for services for battered children, women, their children, and batterers. We know that more than 4,000 women and children were turned away from the shelters in 1986 due to lack of beds. To the Minister of Social Services, what provisions has the Minister made to ensure that battered women seeking shelter as a result of the telethon will find the support and treatment that they need rather than being turned away?
Mr. Speaker, indeed, it is my hope that there will be a far greater level of awareness as a result of the very excellent work done by the Lions Club in putting on the telethon and speaking to a whole host of areas that are presently not covered in terms of the whole area of family violence in particular. And with respect to the honourable member's precise question, Mr. Speaker, when we see that there are great additional needs in this area, we will have to respond with the emergency services and the counselling that is necessary.
Is this a commitment to beds, increased beds by next week when the increased demand for services will in fact begin? And what about batterers? What about treatment programs for them?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is raising some questions that are obviously a matter of discussion in many parts of the province. There has been a difference in view with respect to the treatment of batterers or the counselling that batterers have received and whether or not in the longer term this has been successful. And Mr. Speaker, I am of the opinion, and I have spoken to several of my colleagues about this, that it is one area where we do need research to ascertain in the longer term if the treatment programs that are presently used, presently being made available, are successful, and if they are, Mr. Speaker, it would be my view that we should further support them.
Mr. Speaker, batterers do not change their behavior as a result of no treatment. Inasmuch as shelters have raised concerns that the telethon will create further competition for much-needed community funds, and as they are already suffering difficulty raising the funds they need, will the minister commit herself to ensuring that any shortfalls in fundraising from the community will be met by the department?
Mr. Speaker, this government has been very supportive of the excellent work being done by the women's shelters across the province, and when it has been possible, we have increased funding, and that was done just over a year ago. It is true, Mr. Speaker, that there continues to be a need. I'm not sure that I would share the honourable member's view that there will be a decrease in community support for shelters. If anything, I believe the telethon, with the level of awareness that it will raise, will make all citizens cognizant of the fact that the shelters do need community support.
Mr. Speaker, it's the shelters themselves that have raised the concern that the funds will be diverted. In addition, shelters in Calgary and Red Deer, as well as Satellites in Whitecourt, which faces closing its doors in 2 weeks, St. Paul and Grand Cache are in desperate need of emergency funding. Will the minister at least commit herself to funding so that these shelters do not have to reduce already limited services?
Mr. Speaker, the shelters in the province have been aware of the budget that has been made available to them, and I believe have done their very best to plan on a year's basis as a result of that budget that is made available. Mr. Speaker, it certainly would be my hope that where communities see additionally need, that at this point in time they will be fully supportive.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by the member for Clover Bar.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. To the minister, it's clear that the people of Alberta are sickened by this situation, which is far more extensive than we dreamed. And it is also clear that they would be very supportive of increased funding. To the minister, Mr. Speaker, has the minister now requested access to the residue of lottery funds to put into this service?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure whether the Mr. Speaker is nodding his head in the affirmative or the negative in terms of the appropriateness of the question, but I would say that I am endeavoring at all times to seek additional funding, certainly where organizations as worthy as women's shelters have indicated it to be necessary.
Member for Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, my supplementary question is to the minister. Can the minister enlighten the Assembly as to what is done when the battered women's shelters are completely full and there's an emergency situation comes up? What department policy is there in place to look after these people on a 1 or 2 day interim basis?
Mr. Speaker, until a shelter bed is opened up in the case where it is full when a family approaches the shelter, there are emergency services available as well as emergency counseling.
Main question, member.
Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. I will use my two sentences by reading two out of the Racing Commission report. Pardon? No. This meant a healthy, the report says, this meant a healthy increase of almost 100% in purse supplements and breeder grants since the Commission's overhead remained constant. First sentence. Second sentence. The exercise was achieved without cost to the general taxpayer when the former capital grant to racetracks from pari-mutuel revenues was replaced by an increase in grants from lotteries. From lotteries, Mr. Speaker. I would like to know from the Minister, Mr. Speaker, how in the world he could be given grants to racetracks after turning down requests from food banks, requests from community schools, requests for health services. How could he possibly be given money to racetracks?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether the honourable member's memory lasts 24 hours, but I believe that yesterday the Premier responded by indicating that our support in this particular area has to do with support for the rural economy, particularly in the area of breeding and employment in that sector.
Well, it's disappointing that the man in charge of lottery funds thinks the only way he can help rural people is to help build racetracks. It's really interesting. Mr. Speaker, the second question, then I would maybe direct it to the Premier then. How can he authorize an extra $3 million to the Racing Commission, whereas we are referring, Mr. Speaker, the Premier's government is referring welfare recipients to the food bank while he's given an extra $3 million to the Racing Commission?
Mr. Speaker, the minister responsible for the Racing Commission dealt with that matter yesterday, and I'd refer the question to him.
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, if I could get the honourable member to repeat the question. I know that'll be difficult.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, in one sentence, how can this government increase the awards and assistance to racetracks and race owners, purses, and still refuse or still ask people on welfare to be referred to the food banks for adequate food to eat?
Thank you. The honourable member has obviously not had luck with his horses. As I mentioned yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the financing of the Racing Commission is paid for by those people who place bets. That's called the handle. 5% tax is made on that handle, 4% of which goes into purse supplements, which helps to employ 6,000 people in the industry and adds to the $2 million equine industry in Alberta. Billion, sorry. Thanks for the correction. Also, 1% of the tax is then paid out to the exhibitions to help them generate upgrading of tracks. This added employment obviously would have an offset as to the people that would be required to go to the food banks.
It's a sad comment on this government's priorities, Mr. Speaker, a sad, sad comment. Just back to the Premier. Would he agree, now that we find that the lottery funds are going to help build racetracks, would he agree now to put the funds from the lottery fund into general revenue so this House can decide how it should be spent rather than the Minister for Career Development?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Mr. Come up here.
You leaping up. So, honourable member, please. Please. All right, I'll stand, honourable member.
This is ridiculous.
No, honourable member. Honourable member. Please hold on a moment. The chair was about to recognize you. Please don't react in a high dudgeon. It doesn't become you. The chair recognizes for the final supplementary Westlock Sturgeon indeed, followed by Vermilion Viking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I'm gun-shy, it is not without reason. But, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier then, if he will not put it into general revenue, will the Premier at least prepare a budget that is approved on how to use the lottery funds in the next session of the legislature? Will he at least go that far?
Mr. Speaker, I'd think about it.
Vermilion Viking.
Yes. Please. Supplemental to the Attorney General in the same vein, lottery funds originally were by Albertans supposed to go to amateur sports, recreation, and culture. And to the Attorney General, is there any process being involved at the present time to go to Albertans to seek whether they want to take lottery funds into general revenue and therefore legalize gambling in this province in order to balance the budget or to use general revenue funds?
Legalize gambling more.
Mr. Speaker, there is a fair amount of legality to gambling in Alberta at the present time, and it involves a number of ways of doing that, and all members should be familiar with the fact that there's a gaming commission, and of course the revenues which are derived from licensing fees do in fact flow into general revenue, and in fact barely cover the cost of administration of the gaming commission. But there is no additional consideration being given to seeking opinion outside this assembly. I'm interested, of course, in the views of the members.
Member for Little Bow.
Supplementary to the Premier, and I'd like to preamble by saying I believe it is time that we do have a discussion with regards to the dispensation of lottery funds in the Assembly. We have had some experience now as to its earning power and dispensation therefrom. Would the Premier consider in the spring session a government resolution to discuss the matter, looking at the various priorities possible in terms of the lottery funds and their dispensation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, every member of the House has the opportunity to bring motions before the House, and then I'm sure the House would deal with them in a serious, detailed manner.
Leader of the Representative Caucus, followed by the member for Taber-Warner, followed by the member for Vegreville, followed by Calgary-Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development, and it's a continuation on the subject of the Western Diversification Program Fund. Could the Minister indicate at this time whether the amount of funds for Alberta has been determined and whether that allocation will be available for delivery in this 1987-88 winter?
Mr. Speaker, no, there has been no allocation of funds to a specific province. The Western Diversification Fund is a fund to respond to economic or industrial initiatives emanating from British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba. And so the amount of funds that flow to a particular province will be the result of the initiatives that arise from within that province.
Could the Minister indicate whether the personnel or the Government of Canada is prepared to accept representation, either in an advisory capacity or in a working capacity, in the office of the Western Diversification Fund headquarters, which is located here in Edmonton?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what the honourable member means by his question. If he means, are they prepared to have employees of the provincial government work in the Western Diversification offices in Western... I haven't asked that question, and so I'm unable to answer it. If he means by his question, is there a process by which consultation takes place with respect to the analysis of projects and obtaining the view of the province with respect to individual application, yes, that is going on.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate whether the some $1 billion that's going to be made available, whether that is all money that will be provided in terms of grants, or will there be an administration reduction in terms of that amount of money available to Western Canadians?
My understanding is that the fund is that amount that has been described by the Prime Minister, the $1.2 billion, and that the administration is separate from it, and that process of developing the administration for the Western Diversification Office is going on right now and is evolving as a result of changes to the department, the dry department in the federal government.
Final, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. In terms of the Husky oil upgrader, is there any consideration that some of the funds from the Western Diversification program would be diverted to that Husky upgrader, or is that a program that's outside of the limits in terms of diversification allocation.
Mr. Speaker, discussions up to this point have been centered around the participation of the different levels of government, as well as participation of Husky. No discussion at this point has centered around the source of those funds.
Member for Tabor-Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture. The National Tripartite Sugar Beet Stabilization Agreement was signed in Tabor this spring. That agreement goes a long way in providing support to our domestic sugar industry. In working out the mechanics of the agreement, all items save one have been resolved. The one outstanding issue relates to cash costs. There was no clear definition in the agreement of what constituted cash costs. Can the Minister update this Assembly on progress made to resolve this one outstanding matter?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report to the Assembly that presently it is before the Agricultural Stabilization Board as it relates to the flexibility of the specific cash crops. I'm happy to report to the honourable member that we have had discussions with Charlie Mayer, who has been so instrumental in putting this together, whereby they have indicated, and in turn we have indicated, a flexibility as it relates to the specific cash costs, but we have encountered difficulties with the province of Manitoba in accepting that flexibility.
Member for Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address a question to the Honourable Premier. For several years, the United States has been using its financial muscle to out-subsidize the rest of the world and sell a huge stockpile of wheat. However, the trade deal clearly states, and I'll quote if I may from page 14, that each party has agreed, that's past tense, has agreed to take into account the export interests of the other party in the use of any export subsidies on agricultural goods exported to third countries. Mr. Speaker, the deal was no sooner signed than the United States violated it by offering huge additional subsidies to steal our traditional customers away, and I'm wondering, how does the Premier justify his blind faith in Mulrooney's deal with the Americans when they demonstrate to us every day that it's not worth the paper it's printed on?
Mr. Speaker, it's remarkable how far the members will go to try and discredit something that the people of Alberta need so badly. However, Mr. Speaker, the details are matters that the Honourable Attorney General has been working on. I ask him to respond.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this question, of course, is he has arrived now on the desk of the honourable member for Vegreville from his leader in Ottawa, or Oshawa, and that, of course, was the question that was raised in the House of Commons. If ever there was an example of the need for a deal between our two countries to be signed and in place, that might very well be one of them. That's the most incredible overreaching on an issue of that kind. And in fact, of course, there is nothing that we can do until such time as the GATT has dealt with the issue of how to deal with international trade in agriculture, which is not now part of the GATT, and is part of the honourable member keeps laughing. Perhaps he doesn't understand. Well, Mr. Speaker,
thank you, Honourable Minister. The Minister's giving an answer. I have it. All right, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm directing my questions to the Premier because he claims to be committed to agriculture and he claims to care about the future of Alberta grain producers. And I would like to ask, it was clear through the negotiation process that a commitment was made to put an end to these subsidies through the negotiation process. It hasn't happened. It was clear that the standstill clause on page 35 was supposed to put an end to the subsidies, and it hasn't. And I'm wondering if the Premier will have the courage to stand in his place in this Assembly and admit to Alberta grain farmers that this deal is not and will not protect them from having their markets stolen by the Americans under the terms of this deal.
Mr. Speaker, if I'm going to be permitted to answer the questions, I would ask that the honourable members and the New Democratic Party refrain from drowning out my remarks in laughter. If they think it's a laughing matter, they shouldn't ask the question in the first place.
Right.
Well, the Leader of the Opposition continues to make snide remarks. If he thinks that the people of Alberta want this Assembly turned into the House of Commons in Ottawa by this type of behavior, well, then the people of Alberta will judge.
People will see it, Ray.
Chair has had representations from time to time throughout the week, especially from this side of the House, certain members, that the wasting of time in question period, and Chair would respectfully point out to members that the more the heckling goes on or the noise level, well, the clock keeps ticking, and so be it. Vegreville?
I better go back to the Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker. We know that Mulrooney's trade deal will put an end to the two-price wheat program and take $40 million of legitimate earned income out of the pockets of Alberta's grain producers, may or may not be replaced by a government subsidy in the future. Can the Honourable Minister offer Alberta grain farmers something more out of this deal than wishful thinking, knowing that Mulrooney's deal damages not only our domestic market, but our export opportunities as well?
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to assist the honourable member in bringing forward the correct facts, because contrary to what the honourable member is suggesting, whereby he said, I believe, 23% of the domestic wheat production existed in Alberta, whereby under the Two-Price Wheat Act, only 5% of that relates to Alberta, Mr. Speaker, because the Two-Price Wheat Act only is directly related to the wheat that is used for domestic human consumption. So again, I'm happy to assist the honourable member in making sure that his facts are correct, because they have been very distorted to date.
Stick to honey. Well, that's a great answer, Mr. Speaker. I tried to point out to the Honourable Minister that, in fact, the benefit...
Honourable member, final supplementary succinct question.
Oh, I'll ask the Minister then if he concurs with the statement made by an official in his department, Dr. Joe Rosario, the Director of Agriculture Department's Trade Policy Secretariat, when he said that the dispute settlement mechanism that these guys are relying on wasn't what we'd hoped for. I can provide the quote. Does he concur with that statement?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy, and I regret that the time is so limited during question period, but I'm happy to debate with the honourable member the pros and the cons as it relates to the trade agreement. We recognize that the New Democratic Party wishes to have Alberta in isolation. They endorse supply management for every sector within the agricultural community.
Minister, please be seated until there's silence in the House. Honourable Minister.
Some other figures to the honourable member, if I might also. In the event that he wishes to pursue his isolationist attitude as it relates to the province of Alberta, we're going to have to do away with a large portion of our agricultural community, because we export outside of this province, Mr. Speaker, 77% of our beef production. We export 60% of our pork production. We export 50% of our barley production. We export 80% of our wheat production. Mr. Speaker, what the New Democratic Party wishes to do is have us do away with that production within this province. And if I could, Mr. Speaker, I'd like my honourable colleague of Economic Development to supplement this, because he has additional information.
Mr. Speaker, all of us in the Assembly, I know, recognize how important agriculture is to our economy. It's tremendously important. So the question of the impact of the trade bill upon Alberta agriculture is very important. One aspect I think a lot of members fail to recognize is the potential for value adding within Alberta, and that potential has never ever been achieved in this province. The two-price system for wheat mitigates against value adding in Alberta in terms of the production of all sorts of baked goods, in terms of the trade in baked goods between Canada and the United States. There is virtually no milling going on in Alberta. As a result of the trade deal, there's a potential for value adding. We cannot continue as a province to depend upon the livelihood of our agricultural community to be from the production of raw commodities. We have to work toward the opportunities for upgrading, whether it's in meat packing, in milling, in processing of food products. And this trade deal.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Member for Littlebow.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister of Agriculture, and I certainly agree with the Minister of Economic Development in that objective. But a question of clarification in terms of the federal government policy on the when the two-price system of wheat is eliminated because of the free trade arrangement. The minister has indicated that the federal government will provide compensation in terms of that transitional period. But an assistant to the federal minister, Gordon Bacon, has made this statement, which I've heard. He said, this is not a policy that is set in stone. Could the minister clarify that, and possibly from his meetings this week he has heard the truth of the statement?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to confirm what I indicated to the House a couple of days ago as it relates to statements that have come out of the discussions. Charlie Mayer, the minister responsible for grains and oilseeds at the federal level, has indicated that compensation will be forthcoming as it relates to any detrimental impact with the removal of the two-price wheat system. And I would assume that the minister would be speaking and advocating government policy rather than an individual who serves under the government policymakers.
Member for Red Deer South.
Mr. Speaker, it seems since my first day in the Legislative Assembly, the NDPs have always tried to take good news.
Order, please. Honourable member. Order, please. Supplementary question.
Could the Minister of Agriculture then, Mr. Speaker, please advise this Assembly, has he had an opportunity of meeting with important groups and bodies like the Alberta Wheat Pool and the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, and what do they think of the free trade agreement?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report to the House, and I'm more than happy to go through a list of groups that have endorsed the agreement in principle: the Alberta Pork Producers, the Alberta Cattle Commission, the Western Stock Growers. Groups such as the Canola Growers of Alberta, the Alberta Wheat Pool, have indicated they do agree in principle with free trade, but they are waiting for the fine print of the agreement. It's interesting to note, too, Mr. Speaker, United Grain Growers has completely endorsed it. So the major grain companies have endorsed the principle of free trade, recognizing the importance that it will play to the development of the agricultural economy in the province of Alberta.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of the Environment, our Department of Environment is the laughing stock of the world, is the only department of environment in the world which builds dams. This places the department in a tremendous conflict of interest as applicant, as evaluator, and as grantor of licenses for dams. In 1986, the government appointed In 1986, the government-appointed Environment Council of Alberta recommended that the responsibility for water development projects be transferred out of Alberta Environment. I'm wondering whether the minister can tell us how why this sensible recommendation of the Environment Council of Alberta was rejected by his department.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I've had a very interesting last 6 months and an opportunity to meet with other ministers of the environment in this country, to have recently been in Europe, where I want to make it very clearly known that the Department of the Environment and the support of environmental protection in this province by this government is considered to be at the forefront in terms of the reputation that the government of Alberta has and environment has. So for the honourable member to make a statement of the type that he's made is, I think, very unfortunate in terms of the truth. I would point out, Mr. Speaker, as well, that fundamentally we've always viewed that there are three important aspects to the environment. We've talked about land, we've talked about air, and we've talked about water. And water management, water conservation, water preservation, and the maximization of the use of this very rare and precious resource is extremely important, and the Government of Alberta has viewed that it should be a very protective department like the Department of the Environment that should be responsible for the management of such a very important and rare and precious resource.
Time it has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions, and in addition to have the Minister of Social Services give additional information to questions as raised in the House previously this week? Opposed? Carried. Supplementary question, Calgary Buffalo.
Well, could the minister perhaps that under this lionized system in Alberta that his department did not even order an environmental impact assessment prior to approving the Old Man River Dam?
Mr. Speaker, the debate and interest in water management in our province goes back really since the turn of the century, the time in which Alberta became a province. The honourable member would recall the history of Western Canada. The honourable member would recall that some 100 and some years ago, a surveyor by the name of Palliser came west and basically indicated that a large portion of the province of Alberta would forever be devoid of people because it didn't have enough water and an availability of water. Since 1905, when Alberta became a province, there has been a great deal of discussion and debate with the need to manage water resources in the southern part of the province. And that debate was really focused between the years 1978 and 1984, when numerous studies, hearings, debates, opportunities for virtually everyone in our province to participate in the discussion with respect to the need for an Old Man River Dam. The debates, the discussions, the hearings all were formed part of a very important environmental impact assessment. As we knew the definition of the term at that time, honourable members should also know that sophistication with the current phraseology and meaning of environmental impact assessment has only been basically determined in the last year and a half, and it was in 1985, 1986 that a formal document and a formal mechanism was arrived at in terms of determining environmental impact assessments. The decision for the Old Man River Dam was made in 1984.
Mr. Speaker, the current system is equivalent to asking Colonel Saunders to babysit your chickens. And I'm wondering why won't the minister recognize the common sense of separating the watchdog responsibility for the environment from that of promoting environmentally sensitive projects?
Mr. Speaker, I think that when we talk once again about the protection of the environment, we have to recognize we're talking about land, air, and water. And in terms of the protection of that environment, the protection of the water is extremely important. I would like to invite the honourable member to join with me in the Environment Council of Alberta this afternoon at 1:30 in this city, when I have an opportunity to speak to the Environment Council of Alberta on this and other very important matters. The honourable member, unfortunately, does not have an opportunity to attend. He can be assured I'll provide him with a full and complete copy of my remarks next week.
The minister has mentioned how impressed other departments of environment across Canada are with our system, and can he then tell us whether he knows of any other department which builds dams or has expressed an interest in emulating our system here in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, I think that we have to put Alberta in the context of Canada. Half of the irrigated land in the country of Canada is found in the province of Alberta. We've also had our history with respect to the write-off of the southern part of our province 100 and some odd years ago by the surveyor Palliser, who basically said that if we had no water management, we would have no life. Alberta is rather unique. I might also add, Mr. Speaker, Alberta is also very bold, venturesome, and determined that we will protect and enhance the water resource of our province. And this government has taken the issue very dramatically since 1971, has allocated literally hundreds of millions of dollars for the improvement and the preservation of this very precious and rare commodity that we have in the southern part of the province. I think that all North Americans daily sit in awe looking at the massive commitment that we have under our irrigation headworks and management program, the construction of water management projects that have gone on in this province, whether or not they be in the North Saskatchewan River, the Red Deer River, the Old Man River, the Paddle River, and the Hutch Lake.
Vermilion Viking no. Member for Stony Plain on a...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary question to the Minister. Would the Minister please confirm that the National Task Force on the Environment
which received the Brundtland Commission report, Our Common Future, operating under the Canadian Resource and Environment Council of Ministers, singled out Alberta as being a leader in its environmental controls and its strategy for reforestation and soil reclamation.
Mr. Speaker, that's absolutely correct, and I'm also proud to reiterate once again to the members of the opposition who obviously forgotten about the fact that it was in October 1986 when the current Minister of the Environment in the province of Alberta served as the National President of the Canadian Council of Resource and Environment Ministers that a decision was made to commission a national task force report on the environment and economic development, and 5 ministers of the environment, leaders of industry in this country, and leaders of major environmental groups across the country wrote a very important document that recently has been tabled in the United Nations, where it received recognition from a number of countries around the world. And I might also point out, Mr. Speaker, that recently I was in Germany, and the German environmental very
Additional supplementaries, Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In view of the obvious conflict of interest in the department that decides whether or not to build a dam for agricultural purposes is also the department that decides whether or not it shouldn't be built on environmental grounds, can the minister explain what formal mechanisms he has in place besides the environmental impact assessment that he decided not to do to deal with this serious conflict of interest?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to repeat once again, Mr. Speaker, what I've said in the House now here on numerous occasions, and I've said outside of the House as well. Management of water, of a precious and rare resource in the southern part of the province of Alberta, is a major commitment of this government. The construction of the Old Man River Dam involves the protection of and the need for a regulated supply of water to some 55 communities in the southern part of the province of Alberta. It will permit and provide for growth of people and industry. It will provide for the protection and the enhancement of our wildlife resource in the southern part of the province of Alberta. It will afford a recreational opportunity for people that currently do not have a recreational opportunity, and will also provide for agricultural enhancement.
Minister of Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, there were several comments that needed response. I believe they were raised by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands with respect to Department of Social Services policy or funding. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to note that there is no ceiling on the funding that is made available to the Department of Social Services for people who come forward and qualify under the social allowance or any other type of emergency program. There is no ceiling on that funding. Unfortunately, someone somehow has information that they believe they didn't receive funding because money had run out. And so I wanted to set the record straight there, Mr. Speaker. As well, the Edmonton Food Bank apparently has raised a question, and through the honourable member, with respect to people being sent to the food bank by the Department of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, over the last number of months, the Edmonton Food Bank had indicated to our regional staff here in Edmonton that they were having some difficulty ascertaining whether the information provided to them by potential clients was correct. And in that vein, discussions took place about how that may be resolved. The discussion now centers around an individual from the department. There will become a liaison person between the department and the food bank, but in the interim, so that the information could be ascertained as correct as presented to the food bank officials, clients are given, or individuals who don't qualify under our program or who have used all the benefits available to them, in order that the food bank be able to ascertain that that is indeed correct. A letter, a small statement, was supplied to those individuals by those who requested it. And that was the response, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the Minister for her explanation. I'd like to ask a supplementary based on one of the comments that she did just make. She said that people can be refused or denied if their benefits have been exhausted. In other words, if they've come to the maximum. Is the Minister planning any particular measure for this winter, for the cold months, so that people who are trying to live on $4.80 a day don't have to take from their food money to pay additional heat bills? Is she making any special provision for that in the upcoming months?
Mr. Speaker, the department, through the appeal process, certainly provides information to clients who believe that they haven't been given sufficient resources to manage on, and so are invited to access the appeal process.
There's a point of order during question period. Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, I refer to Beauchesne 320 sub 2, wherein it's considered unparliamentary to use terms like distort or distort the facts or deliberate distortion. The same section that you might be referring to later, but I want to state that I'm not thin so skinned or tongue so tied that I'm offended by that and demand a retraction, because I recognize I will have the chance in debate on the Mulroney trade deal next week to teach the government and these ministers how the two-price system really works. The information that they claim I distorted came from the Canadian Wheat Board information officer. I gave the minister a chance to check that. But my point of order is, Mr. Speaker, Beauchesne 358, and it deals with answers having at least something remotely to do with the question asked. My supplementary question was asking the minister if he concurred with a statement made by a department and his official involving the dispute settlement mechanism. His answer didn't relate to that in the slightest, and then the Minister of Economic Development got up and told us all a bedtime story about something totally off topic, and I think that's inappropriate and ask for your guidance on that.
Thank you. On the same point of order?
On the same point of order, I think what we're seeing here is a sort of filibuster in answering as tinkers to Evers to chance every time you get over. And of course, there's always a chance when you ask these people a question. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that somehow or another you keep them from flipping the ball along, because we're not getting an answer from the first one or the second one or the third one. And what they're doing is reading the press, realizing they're under pressure, Mr. Speaker, and they're hoping that you will allow them to keep tossing it back and forward to extend the question period so they don't have to answer, so that they get away with those mealy-mouthed returns. So I would ask, Mr. Speaker, that you really step down on these irrelevant answers.
The Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, on the point of order, the general question had to do with the impact of the tentative trade deal on Alberta agriculture, and particularly on the grain sector. And if the honourable member would check the blues, I believe that the previous questions in that question dealt with precisely that subject. And I was simply supplementing information, which is in order in this Assembly.
Member for Red Deer North.
On the point of order, Mr. Speaker, not wishing to strike fear in their hearts, but it seems to have worked that way. Standing orders is very clear, Mr. Speaker, that how a question is answered, or indeed if it is answered at all, does not constitute a point of order.
With respect to the purported point of order as raised by the member for Vegreville, the quotes from Beauchesne as listed by the member for Vegreville really dealt with a matter of questions. But again, with regard to answers, we have Beauchesne 363. A minister may decline to answer a question without stating the reason for his refusal, and insistence on an answer is out of order, with no debate being allowed. A refusal to answer cannot be raised as a question of privilege, nor is it irregular to comment upon such a refusal. And the difficulty is that the insistence upon an answer is indeed not part of what the parliamentary process is, no matter how high the level of frustration it engenders in the person asking the question. And this also relates basically to discussion that we had in the House yesterday. And as one who formerly occupied another bench in this House, I realize the frustrations full well on the part of both parties. Nevertheless, it's just still a matter of complaint. Now, with regard to another issue which was raised in question period, the Chair has had opportunity to review the blues with regard to the first series of questions as raised by the Leader of the Opposition. In the third, the Chair brought to the attention of the House the comments as made by the Leader of the Opposition which occurred in his fourth question. Nevertheless, the stage was somewhat being set for the Chair to have to interject in the last sentence of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's third question, which was this minister then aware of this fallacy before he put this out, or did they deliberately mislead the people of Alberta to put the best possible light on it? That then was followed by the fourth question, which is what indeed brought the, or was the other, anyway, the other question that was involved was this: what has happened is this government has lied to the people of Alberta. Mr. Speaker, my question is simply to this minister: why did this government deliberately mislead the people of Alberta by giving out this irresponsible information with the faulty study, and they knew full well it was a faulty study, Mr. Speaker? At the time of the interruption by the Chair, then said the Chair requests the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to withdraw his statement with respect to lie, deliberately lie. It's nevertheless referred there within the matter of unparliamentary language. Another exchange. Leader of the Opposition pleased to review 320 in Beauchesne, and perhaps at the end of question period to do what be the appropriate thing. There are indeed a sufficient number of issues here, and the Chair does indeed look back to its own direction of Beauchesne 320, where it sets out, it has been ruled unparliamentary to refer to a member, and the Chair does note the matter of member, and when is a collective group of members no longer a member? That would take us back to some other of that medieval type of philosophical debate about how many angels on the head of a pin. Nevertheless, as one looks through the matter of unparliamentary language on page 109 of Beauchesne, the references are still there with regard to deliberately misleading, deliberately misled, lie on page 108, not telling the truth on 108. And then, as always, all of us in the House have to be reminded that Beauchesne just sort of slips one in on us on page 110, where it says, since 1958 has been ruled parliamentary to use some of the following expressions. Nevertheless, as you look down there, you do not see the word lie, nor do you see the phrase deliberately mislead. Bearing that in mind, while indeed one supposes that the Leader of the Opposition could give the rationalization that he was not referring to a particular member, nevertheless it causes a great deal of concern to the whole operation of the House. And there are other points of view with respect that can be cited in Beauchesne as to the matter of the raising of questions, such as not questions designed to foment the House, so to speak. Those kind of, well, those references are indeed there. I think it's 362. But nevertheless, coming back to our own standing orders, we come into section 23, subsection J, uses abusive or insulting language of a nature likely to create disorder. So it's language of a nature likely to create disorder, and that indeed is almost a direct printing of what occurs in Beauchesne. So one understands the cut and thrust of debate, and nevertheless, and the chair also realizes that there are going to be times when we utter things which we would perhaps phrase quite differently under different circumstances. So the chair does indeed request the Leader of the Opposition, perhaps he might make a brief statement to the House. But in addition to that, the chair also really would hope that the House would be just a bit more considerate in the use of some of the language that does take place.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to go back to Beauchesne, if you look under that section that you're quoting, 320, it's under the big section of referring to members in debate. Mr. Speaker, I was talking about what the government did, which I believe was misleading when they issue a faulty study based on faulty assumptions. To me, Mr. Speaker, that is a lie to the people of Alberta. I was not talking about individual members here in this Assembly, and I believe that to be the case, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Leader of the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, this is a pardon me, this is a sorely troubling situation. If one examines Beauchesne, it is quite clear in section 319 that a member will not be permitted to indulge in any reflections on the House itself as a political institution, or to impute to any member or members unworthy motives, etc. And it goes on to talk about then in section 320, it has been 320 sub 1, it has been ruled unparliamentary to refer to a member. But in 320 sub 2, it is clear beyond question. Since 1958, it has been ruled unparliamentary to use the following expressions. Contained in that list of expressions on the bottom of page 107 is lie, deliberately misstated the truth. Mr. Speaker, there is no question that what we have been exposed to today is both demeaning to the House and to a group of members in the House. And I believe, on close examination of the blues, which regrettably I do not have at the moment, that it is directed as well at a minister in the government. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition may not agree with a study. The study is clearly dated. It is done by an institution, a respected institution. I am certain that it establishes the premises for the study, and the member may disagree with those premises. He may disagree with those conclusions. That's his privilege. But, Mr. Speaker, to say that in this Assembly, as he has conducted himself, I believe it is definitely unparliamentary, and the honourable members, I would hope, would consider further his comments this morning.
Okay. The member for Edmonton Strathcona.
On this point, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable House Leader of the government side was referring to that chapter that is entitled Referring to Members in Debate. The leader of my own party was not referring to members. He was referring to the actions of the government, and collectively the actions of the government, which may result from officials, not anyone in this chamber, may amount to a lie. And that was the contention of our leader. It's making it worse if it's out of order, but you're begging the question, sir.
Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to point out that to the thin-so-skin House Leader across the way that when he interprets 320 sub 2 as being unrelated to 320 sub 1, that would completely distort the entire notion. If it were meant that they were distinct concepts, it would be written that way. They would be separate notations. In other words, they would be 320 and then 321. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, when it says it has been ruled unparliamentary to refer to a member as, and then the following subsection states the unparliamentary use, they're related with respect to the use in terms of citing a member as. In other words, Mr. Speaker, it is perfectly legitimate to refer to a government as having done such and such under the provisions of this order.
Mr. For the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, the explanation provided to the House by yourself by way of introduction of this particular point of order, and then the further explanation provided by the Government House Leader with respect to this need repetition. Beauchesne very clearly states under Section 320, page 105, since 1958 it has been ruled unparliamentary to use the following expressions, colon marks, included in those expressions are the words lie, deliberately misstated the fact, not telling the truth, lie, mislead, misled, deliberately misleading, deliberately misled. Let us not lose sight of the fact that Beauchesne clearly states on page 105 for all members to read that it has been ruled unparliamentary to use the following expressions.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recall in the very first session I spent in this chamber, I rose on a point of order when some rather horrendous insults were hurled at the opposition, and I took umbrage to them and thought it was most unparliamentary, and I was informed at that time that reference to the official opposition did not constitute reference to specific members, and therefore it wasn't a point of order, and I would recommend that consistency in this case would imply that reference to the government and the actions of the government does not imply reference to any specific member sitting in the chamber, and I would rest assured that the Speaker would be consistent in those rulings.
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister hurled at, yes, by the Leader of the Opposition when he lost his cool on this morning.
That's right. That's right. You came in temperate.
And I must say that I am a member of the Assembly, and he knows that full well. I'm a member of a government, as are several members on this side of the House, and that it therefore not only has reflected upon me as a member, but it is reflected on every other member of the government, that is to say, members of Executive Council, when he lost his temper and no doubt would have, in reflection, wanted to use more temperate language, despite the fact that he had it on the script, did he? Oh, I'm sorry, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre has advised that he had it in his script. Well, if that's the case, then that was more deliberate than,
it was a deliberate
than ever.
Attempt,
It wasn't just
That's right.
the fact that the Leader of the Opposition
it was premeditated.
Yes, I have a copy of the New Democratic news release, but the term lie does not appear in here, so I thought perhaps it was added. On the point of order, though, as the member of the government to whom he directed his remarks, I find them offensive, and I would ask the honourable member to remove them.
One of the other references in Beauchesne that should indeed be considered is 359 subsection 7, which is the one that the chair was searching for earlier. The question must adhere to the proprieties of the House in terms of inferences, imputing motives, or casting aspersions upon persons, plural, within the House or out of it. And so that has a bit of an override position with respect to those who would want to quibble about person or persons. The chair does invite the Leader of the Opposition to perhaps speak for a moment.
Mr. Speaker, I firmly believe that this government did, under a faulty study that they knew, mislead the people of Alberta. So, Mr. Speaker, I will give it parliamentary language, Mr. Speaker. The government is not telling the truth to Albertans, and they're spreading falsehoods to the people of Alberta. If you look, that is totally within parliamentary procedure of the word, Mr. Speaker.
The chair then understands that by that statement that the Leader of the Opposition has indeed withdrawn the previous remark from the House and entered this in the record.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will withdraw the previous remark and leave those two, Mr. Speaker.
The chair, first of all, thanks wholeheartedly the Leader of the Opposition for the generosity of spirit. The chair also is intrigued by the level of interest in things parliamentary that has come to the fore in this current sitting. It helps to sharpen us all up with respect to what the parliamentary process is and what some of the subtle nuances are and what some of the hidden issues are when it comes to the whole matter of dealing with the House. Let's see now. There's a request before the House by the member for Drumheller who would wishes to ask us if we might revert on the order paper to that we might revert to presenting reports by standing and special committees. Does the House agree to reverting to that procedure, please? Opposed? Carried. Honourable member for Drumheller.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers and members of the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 93, I have taken under consideration the question of the following petitions which did not comply with Standing Order 86 and recommend to the Assembly that the provisions of Standing Order 86 with respect to the deadline for completion of advertising be waived to permit those bills to be dealt with. Number 1, the petition of James F. Kalmakoff for the Security Home Trust Company Act. 2, the petition of
Provincial Treasurer and others who are engaging in conversation. Thank you.
2, the petition of Cameron Milliken for the Fair and Milliken Insurance Company Act. 3, the petition of Hermo T. Padigan for the Hermo T. Padigan Bar Admission Act. I request the concurrence of the Assembly on these recommendations.
Does the Assembly